right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. And I'm Laura Chavez, the Director of Research and Data at the Clean Slate Initiative, and I am so glad that you could join us today. I first just want to address the title of this webinar, which was an oversight on CSI's part. The headline didn't match our intent. We understand that the term research subjects can be dehumanizing, and we never want to treat people as just objects of study. Our goal is to ensure that impacted communities are meaningfully included in the research that affects them and to collaborate on solutions. So again, I apologize for the title. At CSI, we know that the most effective policies are grounded in the lived experiences of the people that they're designed to help, and we believe in using research and evidence to shape our policies. That's why it's so important for researchers to engage with directly impacted communities, not only to understand the real barriers that people face, but also to ensure that the solutions that we are advocating for are practical, equitable, and lasting. So today we're going to discuss a critical piece of that puzzle, how we can effectively find and connect with people impacted by the legal system for research. This population includes an estimated 70 to 100 million Americans living with an arrest or conviction record, and yet their voices are so often missing from the research and evidence that shape laws and policies. So today we are joined by Dr. Sarah Lageson, Associate Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice and Law at Northeastern University, Dr. Elsa Chen, Professor and Chair of Political Science at Santa Clara University, and Dr. Erica Adams, Associate Professor of Justice Studies at San Jose State University. Our panelists are three of the authors of a newly published study, Online Recruitment for Interview Participants Impacted by the Criminal Legal System, which was conducted with support from the Clean Slate Initiative and recently published in the Journal of Qualitative Criminal Justice and Criminology. The study tested 3 online recruitment strategies to see which could most effectively, efficiently, and ethically reach eligible participants for interviews about their legal system and record sealing and expungement experiences. So today we will hear from the panelists about what worked, what didn't, and why it matters, not just for researchers, but also advocates and policymakers who are looking to authentically engage directly impacted communities. The researchers are going to give a presentation about the study's context, methods, key findings, and implications, and then I will ask a few questions of the panelists. We'll also have time for audience Q&A toward the end of the webinar, so please hold on to your questions or drop them in the Q&A section of the chat. There's a button at the bottom of the panel that you can click to ask a question, and so we'll be monitoring that. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Elsa Chen, who will get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for attending. And I just want to give a big shout out and a thank you to all of our friends at the Clean Slate Initiative, and especially Dr. Laura Chavez for your support of our research. And I also really want to say thank you to all of you who are doing this really important work on the ground. That includes the directly impacted folks who have been the voices behind Clean Slate and the folks who are implementing it in the states, and the researchers who are trying to figure out all of the effects of it and all of the best ways to work on the ground and in research and in all other venues with Clean Slate. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the presentation, and I'll just go ahead and get started. So can you see this? Okay. So again, thank you all for attending. This presentation is going to focus on methodological issues that are associated with online recruitment for a multi-state qualitative study involving participants who we recruited and interviewed online. So this is the title, Online Recruitment for Qualitative Interviews of Justice-Involved People. First, I want to brag on our team just a little bit because we have this fabulous interinstitutional and interdisciplinary team. My own background is in political science and public policy. Dr. Adams has a background in criminal justice and is in a justice studies department. And Dr. Lageson has a background in sociology and law. And we also have had, on this particular paper, we had help from two PhD candidates, one of whom now has her PhD, and I think she's out there. So I just want to say hello, Raven, and welcome. And two master's students, four undergraduates. They worked with us as RAs for 3 years. And since then, we've continued our work together with even more RAs from all three of our institutions. So it's been a really great opportunity for teaching and mentoring as well as for research. So we chose 4 states in which to conduct our research. We selected Pennsylvania and Utah because those were the first 2 states to pass Clean Slate, and California and New Jersey because they each had some form of automated expungement at the time that we started the study, and we also have had contacts there. This is a copy of one of the flyers on the right here that we used to recruit participants for the study. And originally, we were very naive and we thought we could reach eligible people through government agencies and community organizations. But we quickly learned that that would not be possible. The eligibility criteria are really complex. They vary between states. There's stigma around the topic of criminal records, which makes it especially challenging to locate eligible and willing people to be interviewed. And another complicating factor, which was very important, is that people often are not aware of Clean Slate, and even if they are, they don't know whether they're eligible. So there are a lot of folks who are able to benefit but are not benefiting because they're just not aware. And as you know, if you've been involved with Clean Slate on the ground, courts don't notify eligible people when these laws are passed, which means a lot of people who've already had their records automatically expunged are not even aware of it. And in some cases, during the course of our interviewing, they learned that their records had been cleared from us in real time during the interviews. And that actually led to some really wonderful moments where people discovered that their records were cleared. But it also makes it very difficult to find people who are aware that they're eligible for Clean Slate. So what's interesting is that this study actually started as an effort by us to make lemonade out of lemons. Both getting some research out before we finished analyzing the data on the effects of Clean Slate, because the implementation was so delayed in many cases that there were not effects to talk about yet. And also, we wanted to try to help other people learn from our process of trial and error so you don't have to go through the same process of trial and error. So this is a summary of the workflow for our project following IRB approval. We started with recruitment, where we either distributed digital flyers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and those flyers had links to our website, like the flyer that I showed just before, and Sarah is going to show another one. Or we opened a survey on MTurk or Prolific, and we'll give a little bit more detail about that. And then the second step was there was an initial intake screening, which we conducted via a short survey, either through Qualtrics or through Prolific. And then this was very important. There was a second screening where usually it was an RA who reached out to somebody who had passed the second screening via either Google Voice, text or voice, or through the Prolific app, where we asked follow-up questions to make sure that the folks were actually eligible. And some people were sort of eliminated from the sample at that stage when it turned out that they were really not eligible, or sometimes, as we'll discuss a little bit later, we had people who were fraudulent, we had people who were responding from other states, other countries, even clearly making stuff up. So that was a problem that we had, especially when we were recruiting more broadly. Once people passed the second screening, then our RA reached out to them and scheduled interviews with one of us through the Google Voice or Prolific app. Then they put it on our calendars via Calendly, sent a link, and then sent the consent form, which was approved through IRB. And then we conducted the interview. And at the start of each interview, because our interviews were on Zoom, we got verbal consent and agreement to participate in the interviews and to record the interviews. And there was only one person that we interviewed who declined to be recorded, and then we just took notes. So we're going to focus on these 5 steps primarily today, but then after the interview, we followed up with people who are eligible for Clean Slate, who completed an interview, and we sent them an electronic gift card. It was a $40 gift card via this app called Tango Card, which allows them to choose a gift card from any vendor registered with Tango Card. Then we uploaded the recorded interviews into a program called Otter AI, which automatically generated transcripts. But the transcripts that are generated through AI are not really entirely accurate sometimes. So then we had a process of manual correction where we had often our undergrad or master's research assistants manually correcting the Otter AI transcripts. And then we uploaded all of the cleaned transcripts to Atlas TI, which is a qualitative analysis program. And each one of those transcripts then got coded twice. Finally, after we did that we were able to generate thematic memos and conduct some analysis in Atlas TI and then do the writing. So we're happy to answer any questions later about any of these steps. So after we realized that we weren't going to get enough interview participants through traditional approaches like paper flyers and face-to-face interviews, we pivoted to digital recruitment followed by Zoom interviews. And the digital recruitment involved 3 main venues. The first one was a broad category that we called digital flyering, where we distributed infographics, including the QR code, that led to an intake survey specific to each state via social media and email. And it had to be specific to each state because each state has very different and specific criteria for eligibility for Clean Slate. In the state of Utah, we were really lucky because we had a lot of success through digital flyering, sending our flyers out on the Utah Clean Slate listserv. And so we really want to thank our partners in Utah for helping us with that. And then we also use 2 online platforms. One is MTurk, Amazon Mechanical Turk, and the other one is Prolific. And we'll get some more details about how those work when Sarah explains them. But MTurk has a crowdsourced online sample. It's actually very widely used for many purposes, but primarily for survey research. And both MTurk and Prolific tend to be used also for marketing, research, business purposes. Prolific is a little bit different because there's an opt-in panel. There are people who register on Prolific. And then they have very sophisticated screening filters that screen out sort of participants who are fraudulent or not eligible. And then we have so that generates higher quality data, but there's a cost associated with that. And Sarah will tell you a little bit more about that. In total, we were able, through these different means, to recruit about 108 expungement eligible people from 4 states to interview. And then we've done a second study. We've started a second study now in 5 more states where we've recruited many more people from 5 new states to participate in interviews with us. And we've also done second round interviews with several of the people who were recruited in the first round. So I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah, who will talk through sort of the flow of our intake and interviews and how many people we wound up with.
Sure. Thanks, Elsa. That's a great background. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Clean Slate. It's great to be here and to see so many people interested in research methods in August. I'm impressed. That's great. So, so this flowchart will just kind of walk you through the various screening layers and the various outcomes for our entire interview sample. So this is combining all 3 of our digital recruitment approaches, which is the flyering, Prolific, and MTurk. So we advertise the study in 3 ways. I'll show you screenshots of what that advertisement actually looked like on the different platforms. But through those efforts, we had 2,706 people fill out just a very simple state-specific Qualtrics survey about their age, the type of record that they have, and when that record occurred. And that's how we would be able to determine whether or not they were eligible for a clean slate in their state. And we wanted to do that because we didn't want to recruit people based on their knowledge of having had their record expunged. We wanted to include people that maybe weren't aware of Clean Slate, but were receiving the remedy. So 2,706 people took the survey. Of them, 685 reported through their answers that they would be eligible for Clean Slate based on their state's criteria. So 2,000 people right away either took the survey for, the 5 to 7 cents on the platform and just said, no, I don't have a record. And so they were not part of the study sample. Of those 685 people, we had IP address information for 274. So that would be the person had taken the survey many, many, many times with the same IP address. That IP address was from outside the United States. So that would either be a bot or somebody just coming in and repeatedly entering data into the survey. 224 people who said that they had reported that their record would be eligible for Clean Slate and therefore eligible for the study just were not responsive to any of our calls. Some people gave us fraudulent contact information. Another 23 people learned about the study, decided it wasn't something they wanted to participate in. 10 people we had done the secondary screening with and confirmed that they were eligible for Clean Slate, but they did not show up for the interview. But then 93 people ultimately did. Of the 93, we excluded 7 interviews based on 2 kind of potentially fraudulent grounds. One was that the interview, for a couple of people, the interview was simply very strange. They would not turn their camera on. The answers they gave diverged pretty wildly from the survey responses they had provided. Also ended up not kind of comporting with the Clean Slate policy on that state. So it just turned out to be an interview where we don't know exactly what the context was, but it seemed as if the person had not shared the experiences that our other participants had. And then a couple other people in the sample were interviewed, but it turned out that the type of record they have was not qualifying for a Clean Slate, although they had gone through the screener a couple times. And so those interviews were still very interesting and useful in terms of learning about that person's experiences, but they ultimately were not eligible for the policy. And given that that was the research question, that became a decision we had to make after the interview. But of course, all of those 7 participants were still compensated for their time. So all that gives us an analytic sample of 86 participants. Now, so you can move to the next one. So I'll quickly show you what this looks like and what it costs. So here is an example of an Instagram ad that we put up, and then an example of a flyer that was circulated on listservs, or we went on Reddit, we went on Nextdoor, we went on Facebook, we went on Twitter, and we ended up spending $476 on these various paid advertisements. And of course, the listservs were no cost to us. From the digital flyering approach, we screened 451 people who said that they were eligible based on their record, and ultimately collected data from 51 respondents. And I'll talk more about the overall costs that includes labor and participant compensation. This is a screenshot of what the study looks like on Amazon Mechanical Turk. So it's very brief. We're conducting interviews with people who've been arrested or convicted of a marijuana-related offense. This is because New Jersey at the time only had cannabis expungement, or cannabis clean slate expungement. So what they would do here is they would essentially click on that survey link. If they were interested, they'd go to our Qualtrics survey and answer the 3 questions, and then they would get paid sort of a nominal amount because it was a very short survey. And that's where we get, some of the people who would answer no to the questions and not be eligible. But we were able to get 158 people who self-reported as eligible, and we ultimately interviewed 9 people. The cost to post and advertise the study on the front end was $61.75. And then Prolific is kind of markets itself as a higher quality data source because they are transparent and have about how participants are paid for their time, and they also require a certain amount to be paid so that people earn a wage that makes more sense by doing surveys and interviews. This is a screenshot of the Prolific ad. So this is for our California site, and As you can see, Prolific has you put even more information about the study, sort of what the various steps are. Prolific also now allows you to embed the consent form right into the page. So it's really nice. By the time we interview people now from Prolific, they have had an emailed version of the consent form. They've been able to download it from Prolific, and then we can also drop it into the chat. So it's a really nice way to go through consent with people. For Prolific, we screened 76 people and ultimately collected data from 26, and it cost us $106 to just post and advertise the study. I'll show you a couple more tables before we kind of get into discussion mode. There's a lot going on here, but I'll point out some takeaways. The bottom row there shows the number of people that we interviewed and that the interview was suitable for analysis based on the eligibility criteria. And that gives us that 86, and you can see how it's spread across the 3 different approaches. You can also see there the spread of things like suspicious IPs are really concentrated into digital flyering because we were just like, spreading that QR code to all over the internet, hoping to get interested people, versus you have an opt-in or a convenience sample where people are opting into something like Prolific and they're not going to be able to enter the survey twice or come in with an IP address that doesn't fit the filters. We also had a lot more invalid contact information on mTurk. So people would go on the survey, they'd take it, they get paid on the platform, but then they would put in like a business phone number, just some sort of random email address. And all these tables are in the paper. So if there's something you want to kind of look at in more detail, you can do that. But these are just our kind of our raw counts of each different source. The next table shows a bit more of the costs that were involved. So again, you have the number of people who were pre-screened by each source. So a lot of people pre-screened in digital flyering, less so on Prolific. And then you see the percentage of the people who took that survey who self-reported as eligible, so that they had answered the short 3-question survey about their record in a way that fit with that state's Clean Slate eligibility criteria. And if you go down, you can see the number of people who were interviewed out of that pool of eligible people. And you can see a very low percentage of mTurk. So we had to do a lot of pre-screening to get the interviews from mTurk. 11% of the digital flyering respondents were eligible. And then in Prolific, we had 34%. So the yields are very different based on each approach. When we think about the costs, though, we have the highest upfront costs ended up being the advertising for digital flyering, but the total costs were more on Prolific per interview because Prolific has anonymity requirements where we never email, phone call, have direct contact with the participants off the Prolific app. So on mTurk and digital flyering, the participants would share with us their email address and their phone number, and that's how we'd schedule the interview. That's how we'd send them the Tango card. The Tango card just carried a pretty nominal fee of $1.40 per gift card. Because Prolific does not allow researchers to collect identifiable information, we only are on the Prolific app. So we message with participants using their Prolific ID on the Prolific app, and then we pay the participants through the Prolific app. And that carries a service fee of $13 per participant compensation. So that bumped up the cost per interview quite a bit. So then you can see the total cost and then the cost per interview with that. So if you look at the last table, sorry, Elsa, if you can go back 1 second,
Right.
the cost per interview ended up being pretty similar, slightly more expensive per interview on Prolific as compared to the other 2. But during the peer review process, one of our reviewers pointed out, you're not taking into account the cost of time for pre-screening all these hundreds and hundreds of people. So we did our own analysis to think about how labor costs should be accounted for. So that would be the next slide. Thanks. So we basically estimated with our research team the amount of time it took to screen an individual participant, whether via text or on the phone, and then the time it took to conduct the interview. We also accounted for the sunk costs of those 7 interviews that we're not using for the analysis. And when you add all that in, the bottom of the slide shows that it was about 2.4 hours on digital flyering to screen and ultimately interview a person, about 4 hours on mTurk, and about 2 hours for Prolific. And if you add in the labor cost, MTurk ends up being a very expensive approach because so many people took the first survey and had to be individually screened and ultimately did not yield us that many usable interviews, a very small N. So those are the different ways we thought about these approaches. We thought about the yield. So how many people do you pre-screen until you are able to connect with somebody who fits the clean slate eligibility and wants to be interviewed? And then what is the cost, the administrative cost, and then what is the kind of the labor cost on top of that? And then I think I'm handing over to Erica next.
Thanks, Elsa and Sarah, and thank you so much to Laura and Clean Slate for providing us with this opportunity to share our research. So this table displays the racial demographics of interviewed participants by recruitment method. Demographics for Prolific was actually provided by the platform, and demographics for MTurk were self-reported. Among interviewed participants, MTurk yielded the least racially diverse sample. Relying on referrals actually increased the share of Black participants to 31% of the subsample. So if we look at the chart, we see that digital flyering offered a relatively balanced race distribution. MTurk yielded a relatively homogeneous sample with 77.8% of participants identifying as white. Prolific yielded a sample with balanced racial composition, and the referral-based recruitment approach yielded a more racially diverse sample than the online recruitment methods, with slightly higher representation among people who identified as Black or Hispanic/Latinx. So we could go to the next slide. This one shows age distribution for the different recruitment strategies. Our age analysis found that Prolific respondents skewed slightly younger than digital flyering participants, but overall and across all recruitment efforts, age was not dramatically skewed across the platforms. So digital flyering limited participation from those who were over the age of 60. MTurk yielded a younger sample, with participants primarily being between the ages of 21 to 40. Prolific displayed a slight skew toward younger participants, with most respondents falling in the ages of 31 to 40. And the referral sample showed greater age diversity. So one takeaway from the different strategies we used when it comes to age and race is that employing several different online recruitment strategies can actually help balance out the variations in race and age across platform approaches. So next we look at some of the benefits and shortcomings of the online recruitment strategies that we used. So online recruitment has definitely some benefits, including possible cost savings, convenience, and the ability to recruit from a broad geographic area. Some platforms do offer pre-screening. So for example, Prolific advertises that their panel of over 120,000 active participants, that it's bot free, and that the company continually monitors their participant pool by rejecting users who have provided consistently poor responses. Prolific also offers hundreds of demographic filters, so you are able to reach out to a targeted population. We were able to make real-time updates to our recruitment protocol through our online strategies. So for example, when California allowed non-conviction arrests to be automatically expunged as part of the law, we were able to update our intake surveys to include people who had non-conviction arrests in California. We already mentioned some of the problems that we had with bots and scammers. And the effort and the time it really took to screen those out. We saw that the lack of face-to-face contact made it a little bit harder to establish trust and rapport with select participants, and it became difficult to really verify some of our interviewees' claims. And so that definitely played a part in us excluding a small group of people who we did interview. Prolific does not allow us to contact participants directly, as Sarah mentioned. So we relied on that platform to screen participants and also to send gift cards to the participants. Any online only study is inherently skewed toward a certain type of able-bodiedness and technological capital, right? It requires people to be able to use computers effectively. Um, but at the same time, it does make it easier to reach select populations um, and hard to reach populations. So there are definitely some benefits and some drawbacks to online recruitment. And although some of our online platforms may involve higher financial costs upfront, our experience indicates that these methods can justify their expenses by yielding a substantial number of eligible and non-fraudulent participants. So some key takeaways from our online recruitment efforts are that online recruitment can definitely be helpful for researchers who are really trying to reach hard to reach and hard to find populations, but it's not necessarily cheap or easy to do it rigorously, right? So there are a lot of options out there, and we covered just a few. And one thing that we really learned from this study is just like with automated expungement, sometimes requiring a lot of manual effort, we also had to put in a lot of manual effort with the online recruitment when it came to screening people a second time and really ensuring that the people who were eligible for Clean Slate were included in our sample. We found that it was really useful to take a two-step approach to recruiting participants. So we had the online screening, and then we had the personal contact where one of the RAs reached out to some the participants and did a second screening over the phone or via email. So although online recruitment really helped us find many interviewees, we did find that we had more success when we were able to find a community partner that could actually share information about our study with their curated network of contacts. So thank you. We can go to the next slide. So this is the information about where you can find the article if you would like to read it and get more details about the study. And the next link is, the next page is a link to our website and contact information for Elsa. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing now, and then we can just have a discussion.
Yes, so we have an audience question. I think it would be good to take that one now. This comes from Anastasia. Do you find that people just generally didn't know what is on their record? Like state they have a misdemeanor but really is a felony, making them ineligible, or even think they were charged but turns out it was something like an ARD or a juvenile charge?
Yes, all the time. I mean, I think so. How we dealt with this is we had very, okay, I'll tell you this. Well, our first screener surveys, and Elsa and Eric are going to start laughing. They were like 30 questions long because it was like, what year was it? Was it a misdemeanor or like a petty misdemeanor? How much weight was the cannabis? I mean, it was just like, because we all study Clean Slate. Like we know how kind of rigid the eligibility criteria can be for expungement. So we really pared down our questions to be like, have you ever gotten a misdemeanor? And then the secondary screening, we really just focused on offense types that were not eligible for Clean Slate. And then after that, we just sort of let people use their best judgment. And, because Clean Slate is quite narrow, especially in these early states, people were pretty aware that they had a non-conviction misdemeanor versus like a felony conviction, though stuff would sometimes come up. And so one other kind of methodological thing we had to grapple with was whether we were trying to recruit people that were going to have a true clean slate, like their entire record was going to be eligible, and that just was impossible and became a very, very skewed sample because having such a record means you're getting pretty great treatment based on what you look like in the front end of the system. And so the partial expungements ended up being something that we allowed into the sample, and then also something that we learned a lot from because that's the truth and what people confront when they have the automatic expungements that are narrowly construed versus the petition-based ones that can sometimes be a bit more broad.
Yeah, and one of the policy recommendations that we came up with as a result of having these conversations repeatedly with people who really didn't understand if their record fully met these very specific criteria in their state is, we should simplify the criteria for eligibility for Clean Slate. Instead of having like this many class A or this many class B and this many class C and this many years if it's class A and this many years if it's class B and this many grams of marijuana or this many plants, like we basically recommend just making it a lot more simple, right? Any misdemeanors that are this level or fewer, shorter waiting periods, things like that, so that more people will become eligible and be aware that they're eligible. And if they're aware that they're eligible, they can change their behavior and access opportunities that have become available to them.
Yes, and some of our interview participants, they were able to pull up their records and they were able to read from the screen. This
Yeah.
is exactly what it says. But other people genuinely didn't know, so sometimes it was years ago and they couldn't remember clearly, so they were going from their best recollection. And so like having a way for them to be able to access their records really easily would be really helpful to them being able to understand whether they are eligible for Clean Slate and whether they could actually take advantage of all of the benefits of this policy.
Thank you so much for those insights. That is great. I'm going to ask a question to the panel and then we'll go back to audience questions. But I want to ask you all, for researchers planning similar studies, what are your top recommendations when it comes to recruiting people with records online to participate in research? I think you've touched on some.
Don't just put the QR code for your study out on Twitter, because then you will just get every scammer and bot and random person that that wants $40. I feel like that was a mistake we made early on when, especially we started this during the tail end of the pandemic lockdown. So, we had started by putting flyers in like cannabis dispensaries in California and places where we thought we would find people eligible for the cannabis legalization related expungement. But then we sort of went really broad and then the floodgates came in and we were overwhelmed and learned a lot. So that's one. And the other one go ahead.
Well, I just think like starting really small, like when we started with MTurk and Prolific, we would just recruit like 4 people at a time because we just really needed to understand what the workflow was going to be. And we quickly realized like how valuable that second screening was. That was also a way to build rapport because, I mean, we also kind of looked like a bot or a scammer, right? We're like, when you're talking about research in real life, in person, you could see who the researchers are. You can get a sense for what the study goals are when you just see this like study listed on a website. So I'd say some of the participants were just as skeptical of us. And I think that secondary screening became very labor intensive and kind of costly, but was crucial in really getting us connected to people whose stories were really, really relevant to the policy that we were studying. So starting small, I think, is another way to make it manageable.
And don't forgo your community partners because even though digital flyering on social media turned out to be really problematic for us, when we found a really good community partner that had a very good list of eligible participants, sending our flyers to them and having them then connect the participants with our website was actually really helpful.
Yeah, and I would just add that it's a lot of work, but it's really worthwhile to make that effort to connect with directly impacted people and you know, expungement eligible participants, because we learned so much from the lived experience that these folks shared with us about how policy does or does not reach the intended audience. And, that's, we learned a lot about how a partial expungement is often not really that helpful, because sometimes they were still held back by other things that were on their records. In some places, misdemeanors were eligible, but not retail theft. And that was something that held a lot of people back from jobs that involved any form of handling money. We learned that for a lot of people, traffic offenses or things like that, or prior in some places, prior evictions end up on people's record for like civil law and stuff like that. These are things that hold folks back. So we learned a lot of things that can be done to improve the policy. And that was one of the questions that we asked, what are the limitations and what are your recommendations for improvement? And if you could tell policymakers anything about your experience and what to do about it, what would you tell them? And that, I think, is a very, very important thing when it comes to creating and implementing policy.
Thank you. That was great. We'll go back to some audience questions that are coming in. First, we have, in reference to the workflow slide, this is from Eddie, by the way. My IRB approval process asked how I plan to protect subjects' recorded transcripts. With AI becoming so prolific and helpful, Otter AI or Notebook LLM, what are some protocols that you recommend? This is relevant where services require uploading recordings or transcripts that the PI loses control.
Yeah, one thing that we do is we try not to upload anything that has people's names. So when you use Otter AI, it has a recording, a record of who's speaking, but you fill in the name of the person who's speaking, and then it tags all those things. So instead of tagging it with the person's real name, you can tag it with a code. So, we use like California expungement eligible person number 51 or something like that, and it gets coded like that. So it's anonymous that way.
And some of the platforms actually offer end-to-end encryption with the data that's uploaded. And so we use Atlas TI for data analysis, but Otter AI for transcription. And so I would just say, if you're using a system to transcribe, you just want to see what types of protections that platform offers to you. And even you need to think about how you're storing your data, because like Google Drive does offer certain levels of protection, but if you're using your own Google Drive as opposed to your institutional Google Drive, that will play into whether the IRB would have a problem with you storing your information there. So just think about the systems that you're using and the level of protections that they offer.
I also say it never hurts to have a pre-submission meeting with your IRB. I think like we all think they're like hidden somewhere. We just have to like put together this perfect package and send it in. And turns out that, people who are on the IRB like really love research methods, and they will definitely talk you through kind of their policies and their preferences. And then you can take care of that stuff before having to do a modification.
We had to do a lot of modifications because we had to get our IRB approved in all three institutions. And then, sometimes there's even like a third party IRB. So, learn from our mistakes, coordinate and try to make things as secure as possible, and have conversations with your IRB officers before you submit things.
Yeah, that's great advice all the way around. We have a question now from Doug. Given the nuances of eligibility criteria, were you able to verify that the respondents were eligible for automatic clearance, or did you have to take their word for it? Did the process change between the first and second screen?
That's a really great question,
Yeah.
Sarah.
I spent so much time on this. Thanks for raising
Yeah.
it. So we relied on their recollection. What Erica said is true. I just interviewed somebody who we're collecting data again, who had printed out her court record in preparation for our interview and read the whole thing, right? And we had dates. Other people aren't sure. And we sometimes people would actually look up their record to see if it had been sealed and it had been sealed, so there was like interesting ways that there was like verification, but it was all respondent led. So we ultimately just let their recollection lead the way. We also like had internal conversations where we realized, we've all been in the field interviewing people face to face for years, and it never had really crossed our minds in those settings to like verify somebody's experience. Um, but I think the kind of screening mechanisms we put in place here started to make us get really, really precise on, is this person really eligible for Clean Slate or not? And so we had to just sort of go back and forth with ourselves about, what is the role of the researcher, and is the digital environment making us, have increased scrutiny on kind of verifying people's experiences, and then to the points made earlier, the policy is kind of confusing and narrow. So even if they weren't able to recall, that actually was a really important research finding that, shaped our conversations to come. But yeah, when you asked about the first and second screening, the first screening was really became very simple and very broad. And the second screening is when people really had to grapple with their memory, or they'd look something up. On Prolific, you're messaging. So it's sometimes they'll say, give me a minute, let me try to figure this out. And they'll get back to us and say, yeah, actually it was 7 years ago. So, it's ultimately, yes, we relied on their recollections, and I think we've always done that. It just felt a little more constrained because of the design here.
And one of the reasons that we decided to do that is out of respect for the confidentiality of people's criminal records. We didn't want to go and try to pull out their actual criminal record and go looking through that ourselves, because that would sort of defeat the purpose, and if they were eligible for Clean Slate and had actually received expungement through Clean Slate, we wouldn't be able to see it anyway, which is a good thing, right? So there were also practical reasons along with ethical reasons that we didn't do that.
That's great. Another audience question from Pamela. How did you decide on $40 for the compensation?
Things are expensive these days. So, $40, I think, first of all, we tried to figure out how many interviews we could get and what our budget was going to be. And I think, a lot of people do $20. But I have to say, $20 doesn't go that far these days. And, we spoke to people often for a whole hour. And it seems like it was a fair amount for us to give people for disclosing something so sensitive and personal to us.
Thank you. I have a question for you all. Your paper mentions, and you talked about it in your presentation as well, the digital divide. How did that impact your study, and what should researchers keep in mind when they're designing online recruitment for populations impacted by the legal system?
I think the pandemic did really change people's comfort level with Zoom. So, in some ways, there was like less issues than I anticipated because people had already had to download Zoom on their phone to like see their doctor or something. We had people that would just, if it was too much, they would just call into the Zoom. We were like, and our RAs who were amazing would kind of be on like Messenger with the participants, making sure they could download it, or kind of troubleshooting and getting them into the call. So I think, we learned to not stack interviews back to back because there's often like tech troubleshooting that has to happen. I mean, there was also like I interviewed someone who was on his phone, like on a tractor on his farm, right? Outside. And like, so I think that we were very worried about it. And then we were pleasantly surprised by the variety of people's technological experiences that we had on the call. Some people, were on Zoom all day at work, and we were just on their Zoom call. Other people were like, this is so weird. But so you just have to pad on that extra time. And then I think be very realistic about who you're missing. And I think this gets to Erica's point that like I agree. I don't know that like prolific is the one way you should recruit an entire sample, but it can be a great multi-pronged approach. So I think, doing as much in person as you can alongside it, and reaching people at community events and at expungement clinics is also a great way to recruit. If you put those two together, you can get a really broad cross-section of experiences.
Yeah, I think we did not mention this, but we also brought in a lot of people through snowball sampling. So we would talk to people and then they would be like, oh, my brother also has a record or my ex-wife or whatever. And then we would say, hey, would you be willing to share our information with them? And then we would talk to people that way. So it is, I think, very useful to do some diversification, of your sample. And I wouldn't do an entire thing only on prolific, but it is, that's why we did those analyses. It is more diverse than we expected.
Great, thank you. I think probably one last question. What do you think that your study tells us about reaching impacted communities for policy and advocacy work, not just for research?
Well, we did mention before, it's just really important to do that and to put in the effort, put in the time, put in the money to do that, right? And it's also, I think, important if you're asking people to share their experiences that, this goes back to the $40 question, compensate them in a way that's fair, that indicates our respect for their willingness to share their experiences with us. And then, we're trying to do some longitudinal interviews and talk to them over and over again, because as the policy unfolds, people's experiences unfold in different ways. So we can start by saying, hey, were you aware of the policy? What ideas would you have to improve it? What would you recommend in terms of notification? That's what we're doing now. We're talking to people about, like, if the government were to notify you about Clean Slate, how would you like to hear about it? And it's really interesting because we hear all these ideas that we didn't necessarily think were the best ideas in the first place. So I think you can make better policy if you sort of think about, in technological terms, the end user experience of it. And, I think Clean Slate has been fantastic about this, centering those experiences in the process of policy making. And then we have a separate paper that just came out in the journal Criminology and Public Policy that talks about how important it is to use good storytelling. And when you do qualitative interviews instead of just a survey, right, or some sort of quantitative data about like job outcomes or something like that, you actually hear people's stories and you hear about all the nuanced and detailed ways that the laws affect them. And I think that understanding can inform good policy and good practice.
Great, thank you all so much for sharing your insights and for taking the time to join this conversation today. For our participants and attendees, I hope that the discussion reminds us that how we engage with directly impacted communities is just as important as what we learn from them. I think online recruitment offers incredible opportunities, wide reach, lower costs, more flexibility, but it also requires really careful attention to ethics, inclusion, and data quality, as our panelists pointed out. So I encourage everybody to read the full article in the Journal of Qualitative Criminal Justice and Criminology and check out our blog post on the Clean Slate Initiative's website. I dropped those links in the chat. And on behalf of the Clean Slate Initiative, thank you again for being here and for your commitment to ethical and inclusive research that drives real change.
Thank you so much, everybody. It was really a privilege to be able to share our research with you, and I hope that it's been helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks.